Well, New Since 5, readjusting to civilian life is a top priority for veterans returning home from service. An unconventional clinic in Missouri is providing more resources to help with that.
The mobile vet clinic provides veterans who are living in rural areas with resources that they might not be able to get. WGEM's Zeke Shapiro was in Cahokia today to explain how the clinic helps veterans. Zeke?
According to Missouri's Veterans Commission, there are over 400,000 veterans in the state. That totals about 8.5% of the entire adult population. The Mobile Vets Clinic is trying to provide resources to as many of them as they can. It might be hard to imagine that a 37-foot trailer could provide much help to Missouri military veterans. The Mobile Veterans Clinic is showing that size doesn't matter. The Harry S. Truman Memorial Veterans Hospital, in association with the Columbia Vet Center, created the clinic with one goal in mind: provide veterans in rural areas with resources.
Talking with them, using our military acronyms and stuff like that, it makes it easier for them to understand.
Disability claims, mental health services, and general help with reacclimation to daily civilian life are just some of the resources that the clinic provides. According to Lloyd Adams, it can be challenging for veterans living in rural areas to become involved with organizations like the Veterans Association due to the fact that they might not live near one. The clinic provides an in-person introduction and gives veterans a step-by-step process of getting involved that they might not know about.
That's what I do. I explain how they got to do it and who they need to see. I give them all the information that they need, and then from that point it's up to them to go ahead and do, get into the system.
Beyond all of the resources that the clinic provides, Adams says their goal is to help bring peace of mind to the veterans.
Just bringing up things from their past and stuff like that when you're talking to them and hearing their stories and stuff like that, it makes them feel like they're getting some pressure off.
There are just under 100 of the mobile veterans clinics across the country that provide important resources to the millions of men and women who served. Daniel?
All right, thanks, Zeke. The clinic is based out of Columbia, Missouri. And following their time in Cahokia today, they also traveled to Memphis, Missouri.